We learned in a previous segment that in the original creation, humankind was given a divine purpose for being here. The first human created, Adam, was given the attribute of significance, the authority to rule. He also enjoyed a sense of safety and security. All his needs were provided for, and he also enjoyed intimate communion with God, and together with his wife Eve, had a sense of belonging with God and each other. Unfortunately, the idyllic setting in the Garden of Eden was shattered. Genesis chapter 3 tells the sad story of Adam and Eve's lost relationship with God through sin. What happened to them spiritually because of the fall? They died. Their union with God was severed, and they were separated from God. God had specifically said, "You must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die." Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. They ate and they died. Did they die physically? Not immediately, although physical death would be a consequence of the fall as well. But they died spiritually. They were separated from God's presence. They were physically cast out of the Garden of Eden, and a cherubim waving a flaming sword was stationed at the entrance to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis chapter 3, verse 24. Some believe this act preserved a way back as God's plan of redemption unfolded. Just as we inherited physical life from our first parents, so we have inherited spiritual death from them. See Romans chapter 5, verse 12, and 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 21 and 22. Consequently, every human being who comes into the world is born physically alive but spiritually dead, separated from God. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1. Now, what effect did the fall produce in Adam's mind? He and Eve lost their true perception of reality, and the idea of knowing was no longer relational. We read in Genesis chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, that they tried to hide from God. Now, doesn't that reveal a faulty understanding of who God is? How can you hide from an omnipresent God? Their distorted perception of reality reflects Paul's description of the futile thinking of those who don't know God. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Ephesians 4:18. In essence, when Adam and Eve sinned, they lost a true knowledge of God. In God's original design, knowledge was relational. The Hebrew concept of knowledge implied an intimate personal relationship. For instance, Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived. Genesis 4, verse 1. Yet we don't generally equate a knowledge of someone with personal intimacy. But when they sinned and were banished from the garden, Adam and Eve lost their relationship with God and the knowledge of God, which was intrinsic to that relationship. In our unregenerate state, we may have known something about God, but we don't know God because we had no relationship with Him. The Apostle Paul states in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, "But a natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them, because they are spiritually appraised." We will continue our study on the search for identity and meaning in our next segment.